Every month, the AFRAA Sky-Connect Dialogues series hosts a top executive from aviation, tourism, trade, and financial or economic sectors for a thought-provoking one-on-one dialogues on matters relevant to aviation development. Expect nothing but out-of-the-box thinking and far-reaching recommendations to shape Africa's aviation. Our guest today is Mrs. Emily Mburu Ndoria. She is the Director, Trade in Services at the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat. And today's session will be moderated by Raphael Kuchi, AFRAA Director, Government, Legal, and Industry Affairs. The session is scheduled to take place for 1 hour, during which our moderator will have a one-on-one discussion with our guest. And we will take your questions and comments on the chat box and the Q&A tab. And we'll do our best to respond as much as possible within the scheduled time. And whatever will overflow, we will be happy to address it post-webinar. And we recommend that we keep the comments on the chat box while the questions on the Q&A tab. We have all audio and video functionalities is activated, except for our speakers. And if you wish to send us any questions as mentioned, please ensure you use the Q&A and the chat functions. And at this juncture, I will hand over to the moderator, and I wish us a very insightful discussion. Raphael, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Maureen, and welcome to the show, Miss Emily. It's our pleasure to host you today to SkyConnect Dialogues. As AFRAA, we look forward to our enduring collaboration with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, and it is in the spirit of building a long-lasting partnership that will inure to the growth of African aviation, trade, and tourism that we have invited you to this forum today so that we can have a dialogue on what is going on within the Continental Free Trade Area space and where there are areas we can possibly collaborate and work together to push the African agenda forward, so that sooner or later we would be on course to realizing AU Agenda 2063. But just before I get on with the questioning, I would want just briefly, in the interest of our guest, to just say a few things about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. I am informed that the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, since its formation, is the biggest trade area since the formation of the World Trade Organization. This is in terms of the number of participating countries, 55. And that the 55 countries represents a market of some 1.2, 1.3 billion people, with a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion. It is estimated again that Africa population will reach 2.5 billion by 2050. And this population will comprise about 26% of the world's working age population. Incredible. The potential to boost intra-Africa trade by the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is significant. And the ECA estimates that this is likely to be around 52.3% if we eliminate import and export duties. And this could even further double if we eliminate non-tariff barriers. Currently, tariffs in Africa are around 6.1% of the value of the trade, and this is excessive for intra-Africa trade, and thus making it expensive and not attractive to trade within the continent. Ladies and gentlemen, to help us delve deeper into some of these things and then see where Africa Continental Free Trade Area and the single African air transport market join wings and work together for the good of Africa, I have as my guest Ms. Mburu Ndoria, who is the Director in Trade Services. So before we start, I would want Emily, if you can just tell us briefly about yourself and your journey this far. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this is really a good opportunity. And I want to thank you for inviting me to this dialogue. Maybe where do I start? It's been a journey, as you can imagine. And let me just say, air transport services is just one of the a number of services sectors and subsectors that we actually deal with here at the AfCFTA. And to say that, you know, the negotiations in the area of trading services, we say our mother is actually the WTO. So the first time trading services became a global issue for discussion was actually at the WTO, with the coming into force of the WTO itself, with the schedules of commitment that the WTO member states made, including some of our African countries that we are all coming from. And just to say that, of course, trading services is a very technical area, because it does not only deal with trade-related issues, but it goes even beyond only trade-related issues to other sectors that are covered by, in most of the countries, let's say even other ministries and other areas, even when we talk about the private sector itself. So that is what makes it quite complex. And just to say that for me, of course, I think my mind loves complicated things. So I started with it when I was still a young person working at... You're
still young.
I convinced myself that way. I actually was talking to some colleagues and saying, I'm actually quite worried. Now I'm not in the category of youth. I'm no longer now in that youth category. So that's my only challenge. But so when I was still in the youth category, I did start working on trading services issues at the WTO itself, and later on at the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development in Geneva. After which I continued with the same issues as an independent consultant, and later on with the COMESA Secretariat, SADC Secretariat, and more recently with the East African Community Secretariat in Arusha. So it's been quite a journey, and let anyone out there know that even though it's complicated, it's still a very, very interesting area to work in. And of course, then just to bring it in context with our discussion today, in terms of air transport, it falls under the different sectors and subsectors of the trading services component or classification. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, that's a very broad spectrum of experience, and I'm sure the Continental Free Trade Area is lucky to have you work there and to champion the Department of Services. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Now, tell us, for a very long time, look, Africans have been known to be traders. We've been trading all along. Do we really need a whole Continental Secretariat to help us trade? Where is that fact coming from?
That's our work, and really, you know, secretariats work, and let's say all the secretariats, be it COMESA, EAC, or even in SADC, the ones that I've really worked in, you discover that coordination is not easy. First, to coordinate and ensure that all the different members come together and agree on harmonizing their laws, let's say, in this case, customs procedure, all the different activities that then will allow for the free movement of goods and services and even people. It's not an easy thing to be done. And so that is why member states always feel it's important then to come up with, let's say, to come together. So you come together, you form a secretariat, in that secretariat, and assist to ensure that issues are coordinated, issues are negotiated, and so come up with a common agreement on, let's say if you're going to change your customs procedure, you need then to come together and agree you're changing them to what. So the secretariats actually assist in undertaking that work. Now, for us at the AfCFTA, the secretariat has come about as part of the agreement, and that's why it was felt we can just be called the AfCFTA Secretariat, which is the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat. So maybe when we become a common market, we might change our name, but generally it is just to say that it is an agreement that the different, we call them state parties. So it was the members of the AU that came together and actually agreed and negotiated on an agreement to liberalize their different markets. Now, in that case, we are still a free trade area, but we now have the legal framework. And that is what normally you are looking for. You are looking for a legal framework that will be useful in the liberalization and to ensure that there is liberalization. Now, what makes our agreement even better than, and you can say I'm talking from an insider's point of view, but really what makes it more interesting is the fact that we do have a dispute settlement body that is ingrained in our agreement. It is similar to the one of the WTO, but it was felt that it was important to have one for the African continent because using the one of the WTO, many can tell you is not cheap. It is very difficult for most African countries. And so it was felt that we needed to have one in our current agreement that will be able to handle our own disputes, and we can handle our own disputes our own way, if you may put it that way. So it is improved from the one of the WTO to ensure that all the problems that the dispute settlement body at the WTO is facing, that we avoid having such issues coming up when we implement or kickstart the dispute settlement mechanism at the continental level.
Oh, that's interesting. So we aim to have our own body that is much more efficient, fit for purpose, able to address our concerns as a region, and grant us the opportunities to be able to trade with each other much more efficiently than we currently do. So, exactly. So what do you see the Continental Free Trade Area doing besides just trade? What would be the other benefits of it to the African continent?
Okay. I wouldn't say just trade. If we can already be able to boost our own trade among African countries, then we will have done one very big thing, because already as of now, we do have a very big problem in terms of trading among ourselves in Africa. And so one of the key elements that we are actually meant to do is actually to be able to trade among ourselves. So if we are able to do that, and actually on top of it add the issue of having sustainable development, then I think we will have achieved quite a big task when it comes to the work of the Secretariat and the work that our state parties are actually meant to achieve, and for us to implement the agreement. So the one thing that we are still finalizing now, we are still finalizing the negotiations, and then we'll at full throttle on the implementation of the agreement. So if we are able to implement our agreement, that is the AfCFTA agreement, we will have achieved an insurmountable task. So that is what we are at. And when I say unsurmountable, it does not mean it's impossible. It just means we have to come together. harmonize our regulations in different areas, and so ensure that then it is easy to move from one place to another. Let me just give, for example, we have around 107 land borders in Africa. 107 different regulations, most probably in each one of them. So you can see, even for trading, how do you ensure that there is harmonized customs related, especially procedures and visa related issues, all those borders. So those are some of the issues that we hope will be addressed sufficiently and efficiently under the AfCFTA.
Oh, great. So where does air transport fit under under CFTA?
Now, and I think I had mentioned to you earlier on this one, we have two ways of looking at it. Both AfCFTA and the single African, the single African air transport market. Both of them are flagship projects of the African Union. So you have the AfCFTA and you have the single African air transport market project. So both of them are actually projects of the AU. Now,
so are we to understand that they would operate independent of each other?
Exactly, exactly. But we are both from the AU, and so there is always a link in terms of collaboration to ensure that we complement one another. So you can actually say SAATM as the abbreviation for air transport flagship project is under the transport department, while the AfCFTA is actually a baby of the, it was the Department of Trade and Industry. So, but with the agreement of the Assembly, that is the Assembly of Heads of State and Government, the AfCFTA was made an organ. So we are actually an organ now of the AU. So we are no longer a part of a department at the AU, but we are now a standalone autonomous organ of the EU itself. So you can see that the AfCFTA, for lack of a better word, it was elevated. So we've been elevated to be an organ and no longer now a flagship project, but an organ of the AU. But we are all part of the implementation of the Agenda 2063 of the AU.
So we would want to, we want you to pull us along in your ascent to greater height. As the SAATM, we would want to be dragged along in that regard. But I asked a question about where air transport fit in, because the one thing, as I said in the introduction, if we were able to flatten duties on exports, we would substantially increase across Africa. Now, in the air transport sector, we're battling a similar issue, not duties though, but taxes.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, how are you handling the issue of duties so that we could take lessons from there to try and deal with the issue of taxes we are having to deal with governments? Because both duties and taxes go as part of government revenue.
Okay, that's a very interesting question. And you're right, there is a lot that we can be able to do. And one of the things that that we are working on, and hopefully we've just started, so we have not yet reached the air transport sector to that effect, but it's among our priority sectors under the AfCFTA that we are negotiating currently. So one of the key elements will be, when we are developing the regulatory frameworks for the air transport sector, is actually to ensure that we collaborate together with our colleagues who are working with the SAATM to make sure that we develop a good regulatory framework on where trade-related issues under air transport fall. So maybe here, just to emphasize, we will not be developing like a regulatory framework for the whole of the air transport sector, but we will be looking at regulatory frameworks that are key, a regulatory framework that is key to ensure that we are actually able to look at the trade-related issues in the air transport sector. Having said that, we have an element that we are working on currently. It was actually part of the discussions during the just ended Council of Ministers responsible for trade on Monday. And it is called the adjustment facility. And the adjustment facility is actually meant to assist state parties that are affected by the tariff reductions, taxes, or duties that they have to do because of the liberalization of the taxes that they currently have. So when they lose their revenues, their tariff revenue, then this is meant to be a cushion for them in that case. But it's not only meant to be for goods, it's also meant to be for services. So if the liberalization of services, so if a state party can be able to show with their liberalization of the air transport services sector that they have lost revenue because of reduction in taxes and duties, then they can actually be able to get, I wouldn't call it a refund, but an adjustment cost element can be fitted in to be calculated and agreed upon how much they can actually then be funded from the adjustment facility pocket. So those are some of the issues that that actually can be handled that way. And maybe now that we are talking about the area of the adjustment facility, it actually has a pocket in it that is also meant to assist small and medium enterprises in Africa that we by their countries or the state parties they come from. If they liberalize that sector, how they are affected, then they can actually be able to speak to their countries or their governments to get more information on how they can actually be part of the adjustment facility or even get credit from the adjustment facility.
Oh, thank you. So now, if we're looking at the full implementation of the AfCFTA, when are we looking at you getting into full gear?
Okay, that's a very interesting one because as you very well know, we had our start of trading on 1st of January this year, 2021. And to that end, we've had two state parties because you can't trade with yourself. So Ghana, the Republic of Ghana, who is our host country here for the AfCFTA, did actually send out a shipment to the Republic of South Africa. So that was a way of kickstarting the process. So I cannot say that we've had more of the countries coming, but with the agreement in terms of rules of origin, and on Monday it was reported that now the negotiations on rules of origin have now dealt with about 86% of the tariff lines, which gives us now more room and clout, if you may call it that, for continuing with the start of trading. Now, we have already developed the documentation or the instruments that are necessary for trading, especially under rules of origin and the certificates of rules of origin. So that one, those ones are already now in place, and it is now to start more implementation and the use of the AfCFTA agreement itself now to trade. Now, you may say that most of the Eastern and Southern African countries were already trading among themselves under COMESA or under SADC. But now the advantage that the AfCFTA brings in is actually to connect the or let me say all of North Africa with West Africa and with Central Africa and with Eastern and Southern Africa. So it is actually meant to to connect all of us, and that is the biggest advantage that that we are bringing on the table. And so mine would be to encourage more state parties to get involved and to actually start trading under the AfCFTA, and we are continuing, and this is one of the platforms as the Secretariat of the AfCFTA, to actually make more and more people aware of the AfCFTA agreement and the fact that they can now use the AfCFTA agreement to move their goods from one state party to another state party.
Great. Now, if we're just to strike that a little bit on the movement bit, now connectivity in Africa is a problem, and you have traveled quite a bit around Africa, and I'm sure you've had your own fair share of good stories to tell. Now, if we're going to boost intra-Africa trade and connectivity becomes the weakest link, are we going to be very successful in that, considering that trade is not just the one that is tracked on the roads or by rail, but also the one that goes by air and also services?
Okay, great. Thank you very much. You know, I like also commenting that part of why liberalization of trading services is very important, because it's a facilitator of trade. And in so doing, there is a Swedish, I would call it a study that was done that came up or coined a new word that is called certification. And actually certification is whereby you look at the value addition that services brings in manufacturing. So it actually then shows you that you need to liberalize enough of your services sectors, or the key services sectors, for lack of a better way of putting it, so that you can also facilitate your own manufacturing and facilitate trade. You need transport to move your goods from, let's say, the manufacturing plant to the storage area. So you actually need transport to be able to do that. You need transport to be able to move your goods from one country to another, whether it's air transport, whether it's rail, or whether it is road transport. So transport is a key component of facilitating trading goods and also trading services to that end. So in this case, since we are talking air transport, let's say we need to move fruits from Kenya, since I come from Kenya and you are based in Kenya. I can actually talk about Kenya to Ghana. So you need to move these fruits from Nairobi to Accra. So which one is the best way? Because fruits, if you say you're going to use road, by the time they go to Ghana, they'll be all rotten. So you need to actually ensure that you store those fruits in the right temperature, transport them by air from Nairobi to Accra. So we really truly need to enhance our air transport sector. So how do we do it? And I believe and agree that that is why the Assembly of Heads of State and Government felt the importance to actually have the single African air transport market. And that then calls for the full implementation of the Yamoussoukro Agreement. So those are the key elements. And that is what, and that's why when I started, I said, both the AfCFTA, looking at issues of trade, and SAATM, looking at issues of air transport in particular, were flagship projects of the AU. Why? Because of the importance that both of them play in terms of connectivity. You need to connect the countries of Africa. And truly, we have a very big challenge when it comes to connectivity in Africa, not only of air transport, even of telecommunication. So we need to actually ensure that we work on harmonizing our laws and our regulations so that we can be able to facilitate movement of goods and people from one country to another country in Africa.
That's very good. I like the linkage between trade and transport and all the logistics in between. You know,
Yes.
the one biggest challenge that we find as the air transport sector is the inadequacy of warehousing and storage facilities at our airports.
Mm.
So if we are going to increase intra-Africa trade, which today stands at about 16% to 52.3%, that's a huge jump that will require huge investments in infrastructure. How do you think we should be thinking about addressing this particular infrastructure challenge, considering that most of what we produce in Africa, particularly from the agricultural sector, are actually fruits, vegetables, flowers, and other perishables?
Yeah, great. I guess it's also related to what I was just talking about just now. And when we come now to trading services, we also have, apart from the big sectors, let me say, the transport sector. The transport sector has linkages with what we call the distribution services sector. So the distribution services sector has elements that you're talking about, the warehousing, the storage facilities that we have that will help us to be able then to move the goods in a more efficient manner, if you may call that. And then we also have what we call services auxiliary to transport services. So you can actually, even when you talk about air transport, you have the catering for air transport, you have the agents that when you talk cargo, the freight forwarding agents at the different airports. So you have all those that have to be also taken care of. And another key factor that has been ingrained in the AfCFTA agreement is to have a protocol on investment. And here we are talking then about ensuring that even as we liberalize, we are opening up for other investors from other African countries to come in and actually invest in areas that will boost intra-African trade. As you have mentioned, we need those storage facilities. So you need to actually attract investors to get in. And of course, you have to show them where the opportunities are. Investors go after profit, or where the opportunities, where can we then get in and ensure that we are able to handle some of these issues. Another important organization that has been very helpful in the area of infrastructure development is the African Development Bank and the Afrixim Bank. Those African, we say homegrown African institutions are useful to help us with the investments that are necessary in the different areas, from the airlines to facilities at airports that need to be taken care of so that we can be able to actually have this intra-African trade that we want to boost and that we are all talking about now to ensure that we can trade among. Yeah.
Honestly, talking about the financial institutions support this initiative, I think the African Development Bank has really been up to it, particularly with the implementation of the single African air transport market. Mm-hmm. They have actually provided some funding that has led to the establishment of what is called the executing agency of the SAATM, and that also providing some additional funding for its operationalization. So that is quite commendable, and we could do with more support from other institutions, including the African Development Bank itself. And if AfCFTA has access to support, the transport sector is always there, since we would actually be the one commuting your traders and the business people. We also need your support as well. But the one thing that is daunting on Africans when you want to move around the continent is the artificial barriers. And I mean, it's just impossible. If you are within EAC, and you are an EAC citizen or resident, it's fairly easy. You can move around easily. If you are from ECOWAS coming to EAC, it's difficult. You need a visa for every country. The same way, the same is the case if you were an ECOWAS citizen moving within ECOWAS, fairly easy. But if you are from East Africa and then you go to the ECOWAS region, you literally need a visa for every country except a few. Now, how are we going to deal with the issues of visa if we're going to actually have an open market for our businesses to thrive and for trade to boom?
That's a very good one. And of course, for us trading services, it's one of the fundamental issues that we talk about. And one of our modes of supply or our means of supplying services is actually our movement of natural persons. So we are very specific that we are not only talking about juridical persons that are tied to institutions, but we are talking also about moving persons from one country to another and allowing them to be able to provide services in another country. So that is a very fundamental issue for the negotiations. And if I can say, actually under trading services, there is negotiations that are ongoing to allow for professionals, especially, to move from one country to another. And one of the key elements that we have added to it is that we don't only need to move the professionals, we also need to move people that we call skilled. So we say skilled and semi-skilled. So when we say skilled, it doesn't mean that your skill is not useful. It just means maybe you don't have a degree in that area, but you have a skill that is very important, that is very useful in one country or another. So just to mention that, of course, it's very important for us, issues related to movement of persons. Now, of course, for visa, or the requirement of visa creates a hindrance in terms of Africans moving from one country to another, because I think we need to move away from the point of immigration, looking at their job being gatekeepers, to them being facilitators of trade and movement of people. Why do I say that? When we have executives, I think for the example that I want to give, it's much better to say executives. These are executives that need to go for very quick meetings between, let's say, if you have EcoBank, you need the Togolese owner of EcoBank, needing to go to Kenya or to go to South Africa, to go to Uganda, you know, all the places where EcoBank has a branch. And he cannot just wake up today and say, I'll take my chartered flight to Johannesburg and do my business within 2 hours and come back to Togo. It will not be possible, because first he has to apply for the visa, start working on that visa. Maybe it will take 2 or 3 days. By that time, most probably, if there was a deal he needed to sign off, it may even have gone under. So there is need to really look at how do we facilitate business people in Africa to be able to move from one country to another easily. And the example we like giving is the example of the APEC, how do you call it, APEC in full? It's the Asia Pacific Economic Community. So they actually did come up with a mechanism or an instrument for their business people to move from one country to another without the vigorous visa requirements that we have. And how did they do it? They came together, agreed on the different criteria, agreed on the security features of their different cards that they would want to issue, and then gave the responsibility to the national export promotion agencies to issue those cards together with, I believe it was the Ministry of Trade and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So by the time you're being given that card, you have already vetted in your own country. And so these people have actually met the criteria. And so they actually made it very easy for them to then be able to travel from one country to another. So that is just an idea of something that we can do, enhance the common African passport, or come up with, for us, because we talk trade, we might not say for everyone, we will say, can we come up with a way that business people can be able to move from one country to the other as easily as possible, so as to boost intra-African trade, and by extension tourism. That will be very instrumental for your sector.
So for us, whilst we would want to see the business people move around, we would want to see the ordinary man or woman equally facilitated, so that the harassment that we face at border points is minimum, and people are able to go about their businesses freely.
And of course, it's good for your industry.
Yeah, it's very good for the industry and for all of us. At this point, allow me, I have two questions here. Let me read out the questions so we deal with those, and then we continue. But ladies and gentlemen, if you have questions, please put them on the Q&A tab, and we will deal with them as we go along. Now, one is from AB. It says, is there a plan to create a central competition commission or authority, or an antitrust to govern free trade area? That is a very good question.
Yeah, and let me say it this way. We separated the negotiations into two phases. There were actually three, but the Assembly has mandated us to put all phase 2 and phase 3 issues under phase 2. And the phase 2 issues are competition policy, intellectual property rights, digital trade, and which one am I forgetting? And investment. So these are for phase 2 issues. Now, digital trade, which actually is e-commerce, the e-commerce platform, so it's meant to be a phase 3 issue. But due to what COVID has shown us, it was then moved to be a phase 2 issues to be handled as soon as is practically possible. Now, the key element when I say we have moved them to phase 2 negotiating issues is that this is when we are starting now to negotiate. And when I say to negotiate is to actually come up with a protocol on, in this case, competition policy that will be instrumental in pushing competition policy related issues in a harmonized manner. So one of the key elements, because we are also using the, we can say we are using the precedences in most of our AU recognized regional economical communities, then we can actually say that looking at the examples that we have in the COMESA, that is the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, and also the African community, if we go by the examples that they have set, is that they actually do have individual institutions, autonomous institutions that actually deal with issues of competition. So if we use those examples, then it would mean that even for the protocol on competition policy, there may be an issue of having issues related to competition and having an institution that will be working only on competition related issues. So yes, there is still room or possibility to have that.
Thank you. Now the second question is from Hassan, and he says, if you reduce taxes and duties, trade increases. So the net tax and duty revenue actually increases. Have we looked at examples of open areas elsewhere and the net impact of taxes and duties reduction on government's revenue? Is this something that you've considered already?
That's a very good question also. So I had also mentioned about the taxes and duties and the adjustment. Now, I agree with Asana 100%. Of course, there will be increases in duties, but in revenue, sorry. But you see, it doesn't happen immediately. So there is that adjustment process. And that is why I talked about the adjustment facility. So the adjustment facility, maybe to clarify, will not, if you give a country like Ghana some funds for adjustment facility, does not mean you'll give them perpetually for the next 10 years. No, it will be agreed and it will be seen, and the modalities are being developed as to how long then will that country need that assistance in that area. But yes, we agree fully that once you reduce the taxes and duties, then you create room for more revenue for government. Maybe just as an example, in the East African community, under the East African community, there is in the communication services sector, that's telecommunication, there was the removal of roaming charges. Now, it has been seen that since the removal of roaming charges, or let me put it this way, in some cases, it might not be 100% removal of the roaming charges, but the reduction, near zero reduction of roaming charges, it has shown that actually the revenue of these telecommunication companies went up. And so it meant that government was able to get more taxes from the telecommunication companies. So it's the same policy or theory if we even talk about then the reduction of charges and taxes in the air transport sector. And I believe that's why in most European countries, you had the budget airlines like EasyJet coming up. So I think it's just how do we do the change of also our business plan. And you've seen, you are based in Nairobi. You've seen the mushrooming of the, if I may use that word, of the low budget airlines like Jumbo, is it called Jumbo? You have Aviation, you have Fly. Yes, exactly. So those are just examples of when you are changing a few policies and you speak and involve all the different key stakeholders, then you're actually able to come up with a way to mitigate some of these challenges.
I think the difficulty there is always getting government to really let go the little that they have in hand now for the bigger one, which they can only envision but having held.
A bird in hand is better than
that's 1,000 in a bush.
Exactly.
So for the Minister of Finance, it's always critical that, no, I have this money today. They're telling me I will get so much tomorrow. How about if it doesn't happen? What happens? Okay, so they want to hold on to that and then get more. But in holding on to this, you're not going to get more. You have to let something go for something to come in. And that's a hard sell for us. But it is your duty, just as it is for us in the aviation industry, to keep working at governments and getting them convinced that, look, if you let go of the duties that you place on our commodities that is making us unattractive trading with each other, we would have more trade amongst ourselves, and that will create more jobs, it will create much more revenue, your GDP will be much higher, and so you'll be better off net terms. The same way, if we reduce the taxes on air transport, we are going to have many people able to travel. Like you mentioned, we're going to have the low-cost airlines will begin to pop up. They will get more passengers. People who have not traveled by air before will now begin to start to travel by air. And eventually, air travel will blossom. And with that, there will be so many opportunities and so many untapped revenue sources that government can now tap to increase its revenue. But I think the ball is in our court to try and see how we can continue to convince governments and get them to really appreciate this. Now, related to cost is something I wanted to check with you. Africa has generally been considered a high cost zone when it comes to production. So for instance, even if we look at our agri produce, which are what we export the most elsewhere, if you look at our yield per acre and the cost related thereto, compared to what happens in Asia and in other parts of the world, we don't seem to be very competitive. Now, so whilst we're trying to address the issue of market access for trade, are we also doing anything to address the aspect of the unit cost of production of what we intend to trade with our neighbors?
Yeah, that's a very good one. That's why I'm actually thinking through it very seriously and trying to see so that, you know, you don't want to say all the wrong. Remember, we are a government-run institution, so we all have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, but it's something that we need to keep in mind, that we need to keep our cost of production
and
down.
We need to address.
Because my thinking has always been that if care is not taken, we would have an African free continental trade area, and yet we still have individual countries who have signed on to this, still desirous of trading with others for products that are next door.
Yeah.
Because they think even with the duties imposed on them, they were still more competitive than local production.
That is true.
We will need to work, government needs to know that. I mean, we have an open area, all right, but it needs to be a competitive open area. Yeah. Otherwise, we drop the duties and then we are not getting the trade to flow.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
I think, on a more serious note, then I can give a number of issues that we are trying to address, because if you may recall, our institution is meant to actually be assisting state parties. We call them state parties, those that have signed and ratified the agreement, so they become state parties. And for implementation, it's really state parties that implement, because they have ratified and said, we will go by the rules of this agreement. So those are the ones we are working with to implement the agreement.
Okay. You know that time just flies when the conversation is getting more and more exciting. We only have 3 minutes now to go. So what I want to do is just give you the opportunity to tell us what are some of the projects or programs or activities that the Continental Free Trade Area is embarking on, and some of our members on this platform might be interested in, since these are online platforms these days, might be want to participate in some of these discussions as well. If you have any.
Okay. One key one that I had not mentioned, and I think I would be failing to not mention it, would be we are developing, with the assistance of the Afrixim Bank, we are developing what we call the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. Now, this payment and settlement system is going to be quite useful for trading around or among African countries, because it will then mean that you can actually change the cedis to the Naira directly without having to first change it to dollars and then to Naira, which we hope is actually going to reduce the cost of money or the cost of doing business in Africa. So that is just responding to your question also indirectly that we had just raised earlier on production costs. Now, if you look at why our costs also become very high, it is in inefficiencies in the services sector, if I can say that. And that is why we were talking earlier about the distribution services sector and ensuring that we have the warehouses that are necessary for us to store our goods before we transport. So those are key elements that we need to do. And the other main one is the issue of awareness. We really need to keep building awareness that we can now trade among ourselves, and there is, if you may call it, legal framework for doing it, such that there is that legal protection that was missing earlier when it comes to trade among African countries. And as I mentioned, we are also working on the protocol on investment that hopefully will be able to then make it easy for investors to move within the continent to invest in one country or the other. So to that end, together with the Afrixim Bank, we are having biannual trade fairs. It's called Inter-African Trade Fair. So we will have one between the 8th and the 14th of December this year. We are still finalizing on the venue. It might be Kigali or it might be Durban. So those are the two cities that we are looking at to hold the next intra-African trade fair. So you can actually have, that will be a platform to actually, and maybe also to mention that it will not only be investors from Africa that will be coming to the trade fair. The one, the first one that was done in Egypt, in Cairo, in, let me remember the date, in 2018, because this trade fair was actually meant to be in 2020. It's just because of COVID that it was moved to this year. Now, the one that was in 2018, it actually raised the businesses worth 32 billion US dollars. So we are hoping that the one we are going to have this year, it had been projected to create businesses worth 40 billion US dollars. So you can actually see this is a platform for business people to come together to do B2Bs and also even government to businesses. So we would encourage your people or your membership to actually consider, and you can actually get it from the Intra-African Trade Fair website. So if you just Google Intra-African Trade Fair, you will be able to get that information.
Wonderful. This is great. We will be there. We look forward to seeing you there and continuing.
We'll see you there then. Yes.
But finally, before I let you go, any final thoughts?
Okay. My final thoughts on this is that as you very well know, AfCFTA is the new kid in the block, if you may put it that way. And for its success, we need to have all the stakeholders on board. When I say all stakeholders, I mean we are negotiating with government, but we are not negotiating with government for the good of the business people in Africa, for Africa to be able to trade among themselves. So we would really look forward to the participation of the African private sector in the implementation of the AfCFTA. And the ball also goes back to you to work with us to ensure that we implement this African baby that is called AfCFTA to grow to maturity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. On my part, I look forward to us continuing this conversation at different fora and also at a later date on this same fora again. But until then, we need to find avenues so that between AfCFTA and AFRAA, AFCAC, representing the air transport sector, we need to find ways of harmonizing what we are both doing, what SAATM is doing and what CFTA is doing, so that together we will have a comprehensive solution for Africa. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much, my guests. This is where we end the show. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a good one.